Here we are again. It's midday, believe it or not, or around midday. You can hear the birds chirping. Now I'm going to touch on a subject today which I don't believe has been touched on before, but I could be wrong. Obviously, there's no such thing as a new idea. Now you may have seen the election, or what's described as a right-wing libertarianist president in Argentina, and you may have seen other authoritarians across the world being elected, not self-appointed but elected into power through a parliamentary system. And I think we need to understand what's happening, because for far too long we have relied on outdated ideas and outdated concepts, and that if you don't understand your enemy, you can never confront them, let alone defeat them. Now the word libertarian is nothing new. All it means is freedom loving. That's all it means, freedom loving. Now you can break up libertarianism in two factions. There's left-wing libertarianism, which is based on direct democratic principles and decentralisation. And there's right-wing libertarianism, which is based on allowing market forces to determine every aspect of day-to-day life. It's a very simple definition. Both are against the state and state interference. Now when you look at this in terms of socialism and communism, the thing about socialism and communism, irrespective of the theoretical basis, they basically rely on the centralisation of power. Whether it's a dictatorship, as we see with the Chinese Communist Party, or whether it's in terms of a democratic process or a parliamentary process. I won't use the word democratic, parliamentary process, as we see in the United States of America. But what we are seeing now is a new kid on the block. A new kid on the block. Although when you think about it, analyse it, it's really nothing new. The new political movement, which is storming the Western world, only the Western world, only those societies, well, not just the Western world, but some Indian subcontinent, another example. It's a new form of nationalism. Now let's not forget the Nazi Party in Germany was a national socialist movement. They fanned the flames of nationalism while the party captured the state apparatus and used the state apparatus, one, to improve people's lives, and two, to mould society in their image. What we are seeing is the growth of a so-called new philosophical, new political, new ideological movement. Libertarian nationalism. And libertarian nationalism is based on nationalism. And although a libertarian is against the state, libertarian nationalism is removing the state from any role in society apart from defence against external aggression. So what happens is the people through Parliament have made a decision to elect a president who's first and foremost an Argentine nationalist, while at the same time wanting to roll back all the gains of the past through allowing the market to determine not just economic relationships in society, but to determine the type of society which is created. So libertarian nationalism is nothing new. It's very similar to National Socialism, which the Nazis promoted. But the danger is that all the gains that have been made during the revolutionary movements of the 19th and 20th century will be swept away in an orgy of reconstruction, removing legislation, removing protections, removing things like minimum wages, removing all the reforms which were brought in during the 19th and 20th century to curtail the power of not just a hereditary monarchy, but the marketplace. So we are entering a dangerous period in human history. We are entering a period of autocracy, centralisation of power under a libertarian slogan, and the domination of every aspect of our existence by a marketplace which is based on the creation of ever-increasing profits for its major shareholders. We have seen this creeping cancer disseminate around the world over the last 4 decades through deregulation, privatisation, globalisation and corporatisation. And what we mustn't forget is at the end of the day, do people control what's happening? Do autocrats control what's happening? Or does the marketplace control what's happening in society? And when the marketplace controls what's happening in society, as we've seen with the huge monsters that have been created by the social media, what we are seeing is that any reforms that were made are swept away. And that's what libertarian nationalism is about. But the ugly phase of libertarian nationalism, it is nationalistic component. A nationalistic component which to a large degree is based on maintaining the power of those who control and own the marketplace, not just at the expense of local citizens, but at the expense of any internationalist vision. To a significant degree, the so-called left, both the centralised left and the decentralised left, the libertarian left and the socialist and communist left, have created this climate in our community through their failure to grasp, one, what's happening, and two, by putting forward ideas which increase fault lines in community. The difference is, between the 60s and 70s, is universalism. There is no longer any stomach for universalism. Universalism is based on the idea that everybody enjoys the same rights, irrespective of race, culture, sexual preference, sexual orientation, gender. As human beings, universalism has been at the heart of social movements during the 19th and 20th century. But what we've seen in the late 20th century and the early 21st century is the growth of issue-orientated politics. The growth of politics which not only divide us on the basis of race and colour and sexuality and gender, but by these very same people being involved in programs which change legislation which increases the fault lines in society. And we see this in Australian society, where more and more people, because of issue-orientated politics, find themselves now feeling alienated from the very processes that we have in place. The rise of libertarian nationalism and the rise of social nationalism or national socialism is based on the very same premise, that the parliamentary system is no longer capable of delivering the reforms that are necessary in society, because we no longer have a universal outlook. It's all about maintaining divisions in society. So we see people who are not part of that equation drifting towards autocrats, drifting towards organisations and individuals which seem to have solutions to their alienation. Because parliamentary democracy has been proven to be unworthy of humanity. It's the parliamentary democracies which are responsible for the situation in Gaza. It was the parliamentary democracies which used nuclear bombs in Japan during World War II. It's the parliamentary democracies which used their military power to maintain their hegemony around the world. And the rise of autocratic movements, to a significant degree, parallels the failure of parliamentary democracies to deliver reforms which incorporate all of us, because of that lack of universality in left-wing politics. The left is dead. The right is dead. Libertarian nationalist is not far removed from national socialism in terms of the instruments it utilises in order to impose the will of a minority over majority. In the case of National Socialism, is the party taking over the state. In the case of the Soviet Union, Cambodia during the Pol Pot regime, was again the party becoming synonymous with the state. And when this party becomes synonymous with a particular group, it excludes everybody else from the decision-making process. And the same with libertarian nationalism. The market, and the market is nothing more than those people who own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, controlling the state apparatus. At least in a parliamentary democracy, which is not based on libertarian nationalist principles, what we see is pushback by people. But when the marketplace controls the state, there is no pushback. And nothing highlights this than the current housing affordability crisis. Because if there is no competition in the marketplace, prices continue to rise, irrespective of what central governments do and don't do. Because there is no competition. There is no competition from the public sector. To say we have a competition in a corporate-dominated society is ludicrous. There is no competition. That's why you have a Minister for Competition at the federal level to try to get corporations to compete against each other to provide services and products. But it doesn't happen. So the failure of parliamentary democracy, because it's been taken over by a minority with resources which ensure time and time again, because in a so-called free society they control the media, and that includes not just the legacy media but to a significant degree the social media. The new media, which everybody thinks is some democratic force. In reality, all social media does is reinforce the prejudices and the fault lines within society. And we see demagogues being able to exploit this to their own advantage. And we're seeing this around the world. Whether it's the Hindu nationalism which is promoted by the Indian government, whether it's Russian nationalism which is promoted by the Russian government, whether it's a nationalism which is based on a sovereign state with fixed borders, or a nationalism which is much wider, which uses the fixed borders of a sovereign nation state to promote its agenda. And that agenda is to ensure the marketplace, which is dominated by a handful of corporations, continues to dominate every aspect of our existence. And more importantly, remove all that legislation which was created to protect people from exploitation. We are rapidly sliding back to the 17th and 18th century. The only difference is today we have weapons of mass destruction, and this slide back into 17th and 18th century thinking, where profit for profit's sake is the only mantra that's worth supporting and following, has created the very problems that we now face as a society. As resources are limited, as population continues to grow towards a 10 billion capacity, as production for production's sake and consumption for consumption's sake becomes the central tenet of everyday existence, we see people looking for solutions because of the failure of parliamentary democracy in the Western sphere. And that solution is either based on the centralisation of the power of the state through a single party state, as we see in China, or a nationalism based on religion, as we see in Iran and India, or a nationalism based on libertarianism, libertarianism not based on decentralisation, not a libertarianism based on universality, not a libertarianism based on ensuring resources are divided amongst those who need them, but a libertarianism which is commonly described as right-wing libertarianism, which is based on handing over all organs of power to the market, to a marketplace which is not dominated by small businesses, but a marketplace in the West which is dominated by a shrinking number of corporations who continue to do everything they can, irrespective of the human, social and environmental costs, in order to maximise their profits at the extent of the people. So nationalism in itself is a disease. Libertarian nationalism is a disease. National socialism is a disease. The centralisation of power is a disease. The acquisition of wealth by fewer and fewer people at the expense of billions is a disease. Parliamentary democracy in its current state, where it's dominated by people with resources and access to the media, has become a central issue today.